All right, it's the last session, so he's the guy standing between us and the reception. It's true. Philip is a chartered engineer and managing partner of social business consultancy Euler Partners. He wrote The Business of Influence, Reframing Marketing and PR for the Digital Age. I just like to say that Philip and I got to know each other through Twitter, in the most social way possible, probably. And he's one of those guys that you just get started in a conversation, and an hour and a half later, you're like, oh, I have to get to a meeting. So I'm very, very pleased that he could join us today. And so please help me welcome Philip.
Thank you very much for giving up an hour and a half of your time this afternoon. That's marvellous. We'll see if we can crack through that in just 30 short minutes. No, seriously, it's a privilege to come to 3M. It's fair to say that I am a 3M fanboy. That's because I am a chartered professional engineer. When I started out my career designing assembly lines for diesel engines, the 3M catalogue was well thumbed on my desk. I must have bought many millions of pounds worth of 3M products over the years. And here I am. And what a great exhibit out there to really sum up the wonderful things that you guys do. My consultancy doesn't necessarily concern itself with the tech. In many ways, if the tech didn't evolve from today onwards for the rest of the decade, most organizations would still be more than busy enough putting that stuff into action. It's the humans. It's the people. It's the facility for us to have that spark, as we've seen in the auditorium today, to recognize that things can be different and should be different, and then having the facility to make that change, that I try and help our clients plan and execute. Are we up? Is there a technical failure?
We're checking.
It's on here.
Song and dance.
Okie dokie. Song and dance. Funny enough, I was in Atlanta last week for the Social Media Today social shake-up. And I'm a Brit, in case you hadn't noticed. So when Robin Carey, the founder and chief exec of Social Media Today, starts the social media shake-up to raucous music and basically shakes her stuff, I'm thinking, I'm not sure a Brit can live up to that sort of incredible show. And then she brings Brian Solis on and introduces him as the one, the only, the rock star that is Brian Solis. That kind of introduction doesn't happen in London, I'm telling you. Here's what we do with tech. We take what we used to do in the analog world, and then we digitize it. We went from mail, and we did the amazing thing of sticking an E in front of it. Woo. We've lived with that for 30 years. Why? Email is broken. At least we use it in ways that we never envisaged, never designed it to be used. Now, only now, are we trying to adopt newer digital communication and collaboration formats. Here's another example. Guess what we did when we got on IT? We took the folders and we created folders. That's really playing to the strengths of this silicon stuff. Now, only now, we're adopting that search paradigm. Who wants to file stuff now? Besides, which folder do you put it in when it can go in 3 equally relevant folders? Here, we used to have a desktop. And with an inspiration that is just will go down in the annals of history, we designed a desktop, equally cluttered. And it's only now that this idea of the home screen, of widgets, of voice, of gesture, of bringing humanity to IT that's starting to be manifest. So these are really exciting times, you'd think. And yet, we have business on the left. And what we're doing is, well, we're slapping on a bit of Facebook and a little bit of Twitter. And it's business as normal with social bolted on. And we can continue to bolt on social, or as we've heard from several speakers, not least of which was Raggy earlier, we can proceed now to build it in. The question is, of course, how? Do we really have to wait 10, 15 years? Personally, I'm impatient. I'm selfish. I want every single organization that I have to deal with to get this stuff now, not 2020, 2025. So to really drive home the potential and to try and, in 140 characters or less, convey that this opportunity is so much more than bolting on social, I have this little tongue-in-cheek throwaway phrase that social media are simply the eggs in the social business cake. You need other ingredients and a chef and an oven. At that point, the metaphor breaks down really badly, so don't take it any further forward than that. But it's indicative that when you see a tweet that has #SocMed alongside one with #SocBiz, B-I-Z, and they're used synonymously, I'm thinking, no. This social business thing could be so much more. It might just be semantics. I don't know what we're going to call it, but to me, the potential is visceral. And it's visceral to you too. Otherwise, well, you wouldn't be sitting here right now, investing a day in getting to grips with this stuff. So, just in case I've been slightly ambiguous so far, let me say a social business is not a business that uses social media to help it do what it has always done. And here's a little sign. If you want to see whether that's happening or not, just see whether social has just been used as a prefix. We used to do selling. Oh, now we do social selling. CRM. No, it's social CRM. Well, we've already seen that Chuck thinks that's ridiculous. We did marketing. Now we do social marketing. See, it's just we're bolting it on as a prefix. It's not really changing the nature of the way we collectively come together to do great stuff together better than we otherwise would. Let's have a look at this word marketing, things that social is so, well, you can't separate social from marketing in people's minds. It's one of the same things. So let's open the Bible for marketing. Kotler's The Principles of Marketing. He defines it. You can read it there. I'm not going to read it because, well, I'd just be saying it verbatim, and there it is. But I've highlighted a number of words. It's about companies and customers coming together. That's marketing. It's creating mutual value. I'm going to give you something you want. You're going to give me some cash in return. It's about working out how to do that better than you did yesterday. Okay, so not much to argue with about there. But let's have a little word game. What happens if I say that what we're going to try and do is that same thing for thingamies and whatsits? You following me? There's a few confused faces in there. But let's just think about what words could we put in for thingamy and what words could be put in for whatsits. Here's a couple of examples. The process by which employees create value for companies and build strong relationships in order to capture value from companies in return. How about this one? Process by which companies create value for investors and build those strong relationships in order to capture value from investors in return. In other words, every single one of the 7 billion of us on this planet, in all our roles in life, is trying to establish relationships that are built around creating mutual value. That's what we do. That's almost the very definition of society itself. We are social animals. So this social thing should come naturally when we peel back some of the layers. When I say peel it back, what I generally mean, in plainer English, is dump all the 20th century crap. We designed large organizations in the 20th century because they were the only way we could scale things up. It was an aberration in time. It was a hiccup. We'll look back at the 20th century and say, wow, was that really the only way we could bring people together collectively to do great stuff together? Looks a bit clumsy. It's only now that we can rethink this. People invented the organization, we can reinvent the organization. Think about the dynamics of an organization. In the 1950s, the typical organization was considered to be static. It existed. End of. Well, we've seen that the majority of the large organizations in the 1950s no longer exist, so they got that wrong. we've recognized that they involve the flow of money, materials, time, and we've invested tens and tens of millions of whatever currency, equipping ourselves with large IT systems, perhaps from SAP, to track the flows of those resources. But it's only now that we can start tracking the flow of influence, the very interactions that you and I are having, the relationships that are part and parcel of people coming together to create that mutual value. Tim touched on influence, first thing. Brian touched on influence. Chuck touched on influence. Susan touched on influence. And there were the mentions that I managed to remember. So this is definitely a common theme. How does influence go around, come around? That's the very nature of social business. But because it's very much the word of the moment, it's worth just peeling it back a little bit and asking ourselves, what do we mean by this? I'm a sucker for definitions. It's the chartered engineer in me. I want to know that we're all talking about the same thing. So I opened the dictionary. And effectively, it says that when you think something you wouldn't otherwise have thought or do something you wouldn't otherwise have done, there's been influence. So just bear in mind that when you're looking at these analytics, these scores of influence, ask yourselves, are they in any way putting a quantity on that? And without exception, the answer is no. They are all trying to find a proxy for influence. There is no scalable facility to know why you went on holiday there this summer, why you bought that shirt, why you voted that way. And, actually, I might say I'm glad about that, because that's kind of a dystopia, if there was a system that knew why we made the decisions we make. So every influence score is simply a proxy to try and get ourselves to some understanding of how influence goes around, comes around. And it's your job to ask the question, how good a proxy is it? And if it's clout, it's not a very good one. So we don't have media for media's sake, but to communicate. And of course, we don't communicate for communication's sake, but to influence. I don't know about you, but every time I use the word influence, I always mean two-way dialogue. Sometimes I want to influence you, but equally I'm desperately in need for you to influence me. It's that feedback mechanism that, again, Tim kicked off the day with. Now we can start to rethink the 20th century language that permeates and constrains our thinking. There is no such thing as reputation management. There is no such thing as brand management. It's just keenly being aware of how we are exerting influence and how people are collecting those influences, those touch points over time, like sedimentary rock, to build up opinions about our organization, our community, our way of thinking, our way of life. And if you really want to boil it down to Business 101, what is business? If it's not to try and get all of those with an interest in your organization's success to think and behave in the way you'd like them to, and to adjust your own personal way of thinking and behaving as they'd like you to. It's that quid pro quo. It's how communities work. And historically, before digital, we've only been able to do that pre-20th century in groups of up to about 150 or so. It's the so-called Dunbar's number. After that, it's been shown that as soon as a tribe gets to 300-400, that used to split because we couldn't cope with the influence flows at the time. In the 20th century, we just rode roughshod over that and just created these massive organizations that worked in some ways, but as we've seen, were too fallible. Many don't exist anymore. So there's influence in every single thing an organization does, and just in case it wasn't complicated enough, there's often influence in what you don't do, what you don't attend to, the expectations you don't live up to. That leads us to this fairly simple-looking stack. I say fairly simple because I'm going to explain why it's not in a minute. But fundamentally, we're talking about achieving mutual understanding. And for those of you familiar with public relations excellence model, otherwise known as Grunig's fourth model for any PR academics in the room. It's all about securing mutual understanding between various stakeholders to build goodwill. Mutual understanding is the basis for mutual influence. How can we work together? What do you need? What do I need? Let's do something amazing in order that we can then build mutual value. Unfortunately, because we bolted social on, because we've got this ROI question in our heads, we focused on social media as a channel. I've been to conferences of a far less quality than this one, where presenters got up and said, there's only one kind of social, it's social selling. How short-sighted is that? But they're saying that because they're fumbling their way through this amazing stuff as well. They are sincere, they're just having a problem with this ROI question. And do you know what? When the cash register rings, we can do an ROI calculation. It's when the social stuff is 1, 2, 3 steps back from the cash register that we start to have a bit of a problem. If it wasn't for the fact that over the last 20 years, academics like Kaplan and Norton have built business performance management systems like the balanced scorecard, which, like capitalism and democracy, isn't perfect, but we haven't got anything better. Fundamentally, these business performance management processes recognize that you can't quantify every investment in terms of dollars and cents, pounds and pennies, but that you can cascade down your mission and vision through their strategy maps, through your plans, to understand the investments you need to make in the assets. And by then defining non-fiscal KPIs, you know that maxing those has ROI built in. So the BPM guys have built a bridge out to us in social. It's just that everyone in social, which is typically lots of marketing and PR types who haven't been measured particularly well for, well, as long as they've been around, are struggling to build that bridge into BPM. And so that's what the framework in my 2011 book seeks to achieve. Social business focuses on that whole stack in order to drive greater value for all stakeholders. But I said it wasn't simple. There's this thing in the way. Damn complexity. Do you know, almost everything that mankind is interested in that keeps us awake at night has this at its heart. It's not a synonym for complicated. It actually has a scientific meaning. Here's one I grabbed from a professor of complexity, I think, at some esteemed university. It's a system in which there are multiple interactions between many different components. It bridges the gap between the individual and the collective. What does that mean? It means you can't understand traffic by taking a degree course in car design. You can't understand the termite mound by studying the termite. You can't understand the population of Cairo by sitting in one particular resident's living room and watching them for a week. Complexity bridges the individual with the 7 billion of us interacting. And if you watch carefully with this transition, you'll see what I've done. Social is a system in which there are multiple interactions between many different components and bridges the gap between the individual and the collective. In many ways, then, by its very definition, the stuff we're trying to grapple here is complex. Do you want to do that again? Did you like it? Richard likes it. If Richard likes it, here's complexity, there's social. There we go. However, we can still give ourselves some checklists to see whether we've got all the bases covered. Here's a diagram that I introduced in my book a couple of years ago called the 6 influence flows. For every single stakeholder that you can think of with an interest in your organization's success, whack them in the middle there and ask yourself, are you using today's technologies to understand each of those 6 influence flows? Because if you're not, you're missing out on intelligence that will inform your ability collectively to create value going forward. We can't blame the 20th century guys for not being able to do this, because they just seriously lacked some good IT. But IBM tells us that 90% of the world's data, to the end of last year, was created in 2011 and 2012. That's a phenomenal explosion. That absolutely changes the rules of the game. So 21st century social business can now start to recognize that complexity exists, recognize that complexity can never be simplified, but with great processes, great understanding, we can begin to navigate it. One of the ramifications for that, but we don't particularly have too much time to explore it this afternoon, is that you can start to kick to touch some of those rules of thumb, those maxims, those heuristics that peppered management thinking in the 20th century. Here's one. The customer is king. How many times do you hear that? Customer centricity is everything. Only to then hear your CFO on an investor call talking about shareholder value as the center of everything we do. Then you have the annual meeting, and the guy from HR stands up and says, people are our greatest asset. Well, hang on a minute. There's 3 throwaways that obviously conflict, because you can't have 3 number ones, right, can you? When you look at things through the complexity lens, you recognize that organizations can only best create value when you recognize that you need the right mix of the right skills and capabilities and money and ideas to come together at the right time. That's something to navigate. So where does that leave us in terms of defining social business, such that we've put some serious blue water between #SocBiz and #SocMed? Here's a stab. I think we need to design organizations around those influence flows now that we've got the facility to take a look at them. And by doing that, we recognize complexity. We want to connect everybody involved in the organization. We want to connect the data, information, and knowledge so that we can be more open, more productive, more profitable. And we do that with social and related technologies. Those technologies that allow us to navigate complexity. That's a social business vision. There are a number of ramifications. I've just put 2 here. The first I've put here is the fact, quite simply, that the organization can no longer be considered as the sum of its payroll. Most people in this room know that already. What would 3M be without all its partners, suppliers, and customers? Interestingly, though, as you're putting enterprise social networks in place, whether that's SAP Jam, or Microsoft Yammer, or Salesforce Chatter, or Tibco Tibber, or IBM Connections, or they're all brilliant in replacing that email that's quite obviously broken. But email did have one thing going for it. I don't know if you've thought about this architecturally. Email is open and interoperable, and all of those enterprise social networks are proprietary and closed. It's just a thought. It doesn't really help us recognize that your organization extends beyond your payroll. And because those influence flows are in constant flux, the very design of your organization has to be in order to respond optimally to those conditions. I've put that in front of a board several times, and they say, what do you mean? We have to change the organization up every year? They had this vision that they produce a new org chart. You know, one of those boxes with the little trees that come out and the kind of thing that actually is only ever used in inducting people. And even then, they learn to dismiss it the day after because they realize that the real org chart is substantially different. The title on your business card does not betray the knowledge and influence you have in the organization. Mining of your digital exhaust betrays who has the knowledge and the influence. We need to therefore recognize that this afternoon we might need a different organization structure to this morning. That's the kind of responsiveness and agility that I think we can achieve with social business. Here's a question then. Try to just articulate where I think we can get to, hopefully this side of the end of the decade, but maybe that's optimistic, I don't know. That I think might be a litmus test. Let's have a look. I'm going to read this verbatim because I really want it to go home. Do you help all the individuals associated with your organization build worthwhile relationships with each other and others, coalescing by need and desire, knowledge and capability and shared values to create shared value? A couple of interesting facets in there. Shared values, which came out with Susan. Shared values are the very definition of the brand in the 21st century. The idea that it's a stamp of approval, quality assurance is very 20th century. If a product disappoints in any way, it's not going to last long anyway, right? So quality is absolutely a given now, not a differentiator. Shared values is where it's at. Do I share 3M's values? Do they share mine? If so, I'm in. I'm a 3M fanboy. If not, I'm going to go elsewhere. And coalescing, giving people the autonomy to identify their own skills and capabilities, desires and knowledge, to find other people that they can best work with to add that mutual value. And here's the galling thing. It's actually almost upsetting. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've written this in 2013. And then I go and see a quote just outside your exhibition here from one of your past presidents. McKnight, I believe his name. The McKnight Principles from the 1940s. Stone the crows, as we say in London, if that isn't the McKnight Principles. Writ large in the social age. Damn. You guys have got there way before everyone else. And now it's just a case of channeling that. This now gives you, if you like, those shared values, the values that can infuse the way in which you design social for 3M's prosperity going forward. So I'll conclude with this. I'll thank you very much for your attention and the invitation again. I'm very keen that as many people as possible get this. And I recognise that my management text of 2011 isn't everybody's cup of tea. Not everybody wants to read, dare I say, a dry management text. So I've just recently written a story. It's a fable. Stories are the oldest way to convey ideas and have them retold. So I've written a story about a fictitious chief executive who takes the reins at a fictitious company. And between his management team and the wider team in the organisation, they start to work through questions of complexity, questions of social, questions of what brand means in the 21st century, questions of big data, the Internet of Things. It's all in there, but in a really accessible way, such that in a 2-hour flight, you can come off the other end having read a story and have lots of burning questions about how I can change up things in the organisation. It's a way of motivating. I said I'm about the spark and the change in the organisation, and you can't inculcate change if the light hasn't gone on in the way that we've just seen in that planetarium today. This is part of the spark. This is part of the energising of the culture in order to make that change happen. So that's my vision for social business. I'm absolutely sure it doesn't sit squarely in your heads. You'll have different ideas, different facets. And that's a great thing, because that's why Greg brought us here today, in order that we can start to understand where each other's coming from, mutual understanding, so that we can mutually influence each other, so that we can all build mutual value. Thanks very much for your time.